Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I just realized that's a really old picture. Well, actually, it's not that old. That's pre-COVID. So if you want to know what COVID as an experience did to a human being, that's a good example. So I'm actually, that's not my son or my nephew. That's actually me, but that was prior to COVID. So, okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to take you through to lunch. So not too many people left, which is quite reassuring. So hopefully we can build up the appetite. There's not too many slides. The presentation is, well, I wouldn't say it's going off on a tangent. It certainly builds on everything that we've covered today. So I'll be focusing on security operations and security operations platforms. And so I've got a brief kind of narrative, a number of slides that actually then goes through, not just from a Fortinet perspective, generally from a security operations perspective, what the approach should be to security operations. So SOCs, security operations, is a very, as well as AI, as well as automation, collaboration, they're very hot kind of topics within cybersecurity and kind of any industry that's kind of looking into digital data security. But I think, everything that we've covered today is a very good premise in regards to why SOCs, or the concept of a security operations center, whether you're dealing it with yourself as an organization or you're partnering with someone like Integrity 360, everything that we talked about today, starting from Brian's presentation, in regards to managing threats and exposure, is a very good kind of background to why security operations are so important, because they are what customers, what our partners are actually turning to or looking to address the security issues, the security challenges that we're facing today. So I can do a whole bunch of, well, not a whole bunch, I can do a few slides in regards to, why the state of cybersecurity is looking worrying today, why you should be looking to partnering with the Security Operations Center, looking at your own Security Operations Center. But at the risk of making myself look a bit silly, I'll go a bit academic. I don't mind being silly because I'm too old to care now about that type of stuff. But it's actually good because I use this quote quite a bit. I'm not an academic, as you can probably tell from my very thinly veiled North London accent, in it, bruv. So I'm not an academic. This is probably going to not come across how I anticipated to, but I'll make an attempt anyway. It is a quote that I use quite regularly, and it's from Oscar Wilde. So I didn't actually select Oscar Wilde because I'm in Dublin and it's his birthplace, but it is something that it is used quite regularly in my previous presentations. And it's a quote, or it's not really a quote, it's a premise that he kind of pushed or opinioned in his essay. I think it was towards the end of the 19th century when I was still in school. I think it was about 1889, and it was his essay, The Decay of Lying. And in The Decay of Lying, he mentioned that, or he opinioned in the narrative, that life imitates art a lot more than art imitates life. And the premise for that is that in art, we have freedom of expression, or, humans have freedom of expression in art, whereas in life, we're quite regimented. We'd like to think that we're free and we can do whatever we want, but life, especially towards the end of the 19th century, was very regimented, in a very, not process-driven, but it was very restricted what we could do as humans, especially kind of in Western Europe. But art allowed that freedom of expression. So, how does this link on to security operations, and, how does this possibly link on to anything to do with digital cybersecurity? Well, if at the end of the 19th century we're looking at art as our freedom of expression, you kind of fast forward 100 years and a little bit more. Today, what we're allowed to do as humans with the digitization, with social media, with the smart devices that everyone has in their hands, pretty much less everyone globally has in their hands, has kind of exponentially exploded that, digital surface of attack. So starting from Brian's, presentation this morning about, threat exposure, we kind of look at the environment. So towards the end of the 19th century, if us as humans, we were expressing ourselves through art, now, with the rate of digitization, and obviously it's going to continue, we ourselves are the main proponents of the expansion of that attack surface. So if the attack surface is getting larger, how do we look to quantify it? How do we look to protect it? I think, security operations or a security operations platform, is a good place to kind of discuss that. So hopefully I got some sort of message across there, and I didn't make too much of a fool of myself. If I did, feel free to come and insult me. I'll be on the Fortinet stand with the rest of the staff, Fortinet staff. Don't insult them, obviously, it's not their fault, they didn't put me up to it. But I'm here for the rest of the day. But really, in regards to the rest of the presentation, it is kind of focusing on how the security operation should be more than just a collection of best-in-breed tools. It needs to be actually a set of technologies that work together in a collaborative and a coherent fashion to make your life easier and to make actually quantifying the attack surface and protecting yourself a lot easier as well. So, if we start at the very top level, and at this point, I'll actually kind of switch the word over from SOC, from Security Operations Center, to cyber defenses. So to a lot of organizations, when I say Security Operations Center, it could be relevant, it might not be relevant. Some organizations say we're not large enough for a SOC. Some organizations say, oh, that's somebody else takes care of that. Or, we have a different division within our own organization that we have nothing to do with. So, if we replace the word SOC with cyber defenses, then it becomes relevant to a two-person non-for-profit organization, all the way up to an organization with 500,000 plus endpoints, users, or devices. And really, what does that actually SOC, or what does the base premise of your cyber defenses look like? So if we have a look in there's two slides. So the square in the middle, the green kind of square in the middle, if you think of that as your cyber defenses, the two kind of main inputs into your cyber defenses or your SOC are the threat intel and the environmental data. Now, threat intel a few years ago was nice to have. Ian had a very good presentation. The Checkpoint presentation was good. It highlighted the fact that vendors, the cybersecurity vendors that have been going for quite a number of years, the actual machine learning and AI that we've been using isn't anything new to a vendor. To cope, as Fortinet, we're fortunate enough to have a wide range of products that starts with the kernel level of the operating system with EDR technology, all the way up to public and private cloud workloads. So, with all these sensors and all these technologies out there, in FortiGuard, which is our threat intel research center, receive a huge amount of information. To cope with that volume of information, like vendors like Checkpoint, like vendors like Fortinet, and I imagine pretty much just like any other serious cybersecurity vendor out there, we all pretty much just had to turn on machine learning AI a number of years ago. Because just sheerly to cope with the amount of data that the cybersecurity vendors are receiving. So that's actually been part of most cybersecurity vendors' portfolio for a number of years. Gen AI is something a bit different. So that's the LLMs that's been discussed quite regularly today. And it's really refreshing today to see that AI isn't just being looked as a source of terror, potential source of terror that's going to kind of destroy us. We're all we're going to be, I think for the rest of the presentations today as well, we're going to look at it both as an adversary and kind of a companion in digital cyber defenses. My view, because I'm old enough to say this, as humans, we didn't really even need AI to digitally destroy ourselves. We just needed digitization. I remember the first time I digitally destroyed myself, I think I was about 17 years old, and my parents found my internet search history. So coming from a strict Pakistani family, that didn't bode too well. If I fast forward 30 years, I haven't learned much. Now my wife just has to pick up my phone if it's unlocked. She doesn't even have to go to the internet search history. She just needs to look at the messages. And then I've digitally destroyed myself again. So, it's nice to see the conversations in regards to AI today, not just about things that can go wrong. It's how you can use AI to actually protect yourself. So threat intel a few years ago was seen as a nice to have. Now it's actually seen as essential. With supply chain attacks, that operating that digital kind of ecosystem around your organization is essential. And in FortiGuard, we've been producing raw IOC feeds for over a decade. So we produce our automated updates and signatures and databases that get pushed out to our devices. But quite often, customers and partners say to us, well, look, whilst you're working on an emerging threat, give us access to that information. And that was popular about a decade ago. We saw government organizations, defense organizations say, look, show us what you're working on, and we want to actually have a look at that as well. And we've seen a shift from that now. Organizations are no longer saying that we want the raw threat intel feed because there's just too much data to consume. We know, as well as there's a digital cyber skill shortage out there. So hiring the right people, paying them enough. Quite often you're dealing with someone who's half your age, which is normally that wants double your salary, and you're kind of looking them in the eye and saying, I know you're going to leave. I know you're going to get skilled up and you're going to leave. And that's a challenge that we have, when it comes to actually overwhelming your threat analyst. So the information that you receive in an organization, has to be relevant. So Threat intel is an essential part of what gets fed into your cyber defenses. Environmental data, anything that's digital, be it digital data that's stationary, digital data that's in transit, and then based on that information which goes into the middle square, we then take our responses, or the SOC center then processes that and takes the appropriate response. One thing that's good to see, and it's been mentioned quite a few times today, is the drive for regulation. So again, no longer are organizations and customers looking for that pure best in breed. The RFPs and the kind of technology drive isn't like we have to have the best of breed. Now with things like regulation, continuity, NIST, DORA, SOC 2 compliance, organizations actually have this, I wouldn't say like a shadow of regulation because it's needed, but there is kind of this constant need to make sure that we're compliant in everything that you do and we do as a vendor as well. So I actually personally think it's a good thing. It's stopping those technology discussions from being too laser focused on technology, and the business is always kind of keeping those conversations not reined back, but sensible. So everything that I view is that it happens with a security operations center or your cyber defenses have to keep the business in mind. So really, I think this is my last slide. But if I go back to the SOC center now, so again, we've got the 4 boxes, the one in the middle, imagine that as your cyber defenses, imagine that as your security operations center. And even if you're saying, look, we're not big enough for a SOC, or I don't deal with the SOC, just think of that as your cyber defenses. So like I said, with threat intel, no longer is it acceptable now just to have those raw IOC feeds coming in, where you're just pumping, sticks, API calls, and taxi feeds. Organizations want to now actually contextualize threat intel. So the blue boxes represent Fortinet products, but I mean, they can quite easily be any other product. So here we have a product called FortiRecon. My team kind of look at that after that. We span EMEA and APAC, so I'm very fortunate enough to work with a wide variety of customers. But FortiRecon sits within what we call the digital risk protection space. And what that basically does is look at your organization as a digital asset from the outside looking in. So no software, there's no agents. We look at what the public-facing vulnerabilities are, but this is FortiGuard. This is our threat intel center looking after your organization in regards to social media channels, on the dark web, brand protection, phishing sites, and various conversations in threat actor forums. So this is something as your organization that can be entirely offloaded onto FortiGuard, which is our threat intel center. And that's just not exclusively contextualized threat intel for your organization, it's your operating environment as well. So, supply chain attacks, I think for me, technically, the first one that really opened my eyes was the SolarWinds attack, and the Starburst SolarWinds attack. And with that, everyone's emphasis went on not just, protecting your own organization, it's your operating environment. So with something like FortiRecon, if we're doing the threat intel research on your organization, you can also use something like a digital risk protection solution to look at your supply chain as well. What is the attack surface? What is the exposure potentially of your partners and the people that you digitally interact with? And the great thing about this digital risk protection solutions, not just FortiRecon, is I know a lot of organizations are suffering from management interface fatigue. So, as a result of, 2 decades of kind of saying we need best in breed, and just implementing technology, with a laser focus, organizations have ended up with multiple management platforms, logging systems, and a whole array of different technologies. So everything that we kind of do from an advanced threats point of view is underpinned by open standards. So it's something like FortiRecon. There's no software, there's no agents to be installed. Your organization is looked after as a digital asset, but it's pure, if you don't want to even log on to the management interface, it's pure API in, pure API out. So whatever management platform that you're operating today, the data that we FortiGuard intelligence channel can actually then gauge can be extracted using APIs. And some of the stuff in there that we see is, it's beyond science fiction. Whatever your views are geopolitically, for me, again, it's been very interesting to see how the trends vary from different parts of the world, and in just something as basic as social media, or not as basic as social media, but something like Facebook in, I think, Western Europe is considered to be really for older people. I'm so old I don't even use that. Well, actually, it's to minimize the attack surface with my wife. So the less I'm on social media, the better. But so yeah, whereas actually, really strangely, I found with FortiRecon in South Asia, in regards to recruitment, incredibly, a lot of recruitment is done for jobs, technical jobs in Southeast Asia is done via Facebook. And so, something that I guess I didn't even consider as basic as phishing sites is a huge attack surface in Southeast Asia. So fake recruitment websites that just sit there as data, as data miners, collecting huge amount of information about the, current geography. I would have dismissed that as kind of boring, but it's a huge kind of potential and an attack surface. So, that type of tasks, which you can't undertake yourself. Like I said, digitally, we're all overwhelmed. In the pandemic, we were forced to have our personal and professional lives merge together. I don't know about you, but I'm struggling to kind of detangle now. Post pandemic, because the intensity was there to kind of work from home, and now actually then trying to get back to the office and finding those acceptable working hours is a bit of a challenge. So threat intel is covered by contextual intelligence. So if we look at environmental data. So this is a Gartner term, EDP, at the top. So this technology stack, which is EDP, Early Detection Prevention, this is for us, and again, they're Fortinet products here, but I mean, it can be any vendor sandbox, any vendor's EDR, or any vendor's NDR technology. And that green shield there, for me, represents that threat analyst. The threat analyst, which is very difficult to recruit, very difficult to hire, very difficult to pay and keep hold of. For me, the EDP stack in regards to cyber defenses or security operations is Fortinet or FortiGuard or your vendor, whoever you work with, actually saying, look, have this threat analyst. This is an extension of our threat research team. And with Forti Sandbox, EDR, and NDR, we can work exclusively cloud-based, exclusively on-prem, or with a hybrid. And for me, I was one of the original engineers for Forti Sandbox. I really saw that as the first, threat analyst technology. It was where you were basically giving a vendor a file or a URL and say, look, deep analyze that for me. Now with the scarcity of threat analysts out there, would you give a highly paid threat analyst 1,000 Excel or 1,000 spreadsheets to deep scan, 1,000 Excel or Office documents to deep scan? You wouldn't, because you're kind of like 99.99999% sure that those files are going to be clean. And you wouldn't want to waste an expensive resource, scanning those files. But with something like sandboxing technology, not just Forti Sandbox, you give this, this black box basically files and URLs and say, look, deep scan these for me. Deep scan these 10, 20, 50, 100,000 files in a day, and I want a detailed verdict in regards to what they're doing with CPU, memory, what their cloud calls are, where they're calling out across the network. So sandboxing technology for me is that, that first kind of threat analyst, that first virtual security analyst. And in environments where because with any vendor sandbox, the file or the URL has to make its way to the sandbox. And in an environment where you can't actually get the file onto a sandbox, that's where EDR technology comes in. So EDR basically says, well, look, if you can't get the file or URL to me, I'll come to you. I will sit at the kernel level of the operating system and do the deep analysis at that point. And environments where you have legacy operating systems, OT environments, things that are entirely air-gapped from the internet, where you can't have EDR technology, or you can't have an agent go onto the endpoint, or you can't actually have the file thrown across the network into a sandbox. This is where NDR comes in. Be it encrypted or non-encrypted traffic, NDR basically says, okay, look, put me on the side of the network. I will deep analyze to the best of my ability all the transient digital kind of traffic that's going past. And for me, that EDP stack, even though it's Gartner terminology, I really like it because that is, early detection prevention. For me, the EDP technology stack is your virtual threat analyst. Not just from Fortinet, from any vendor that you partner with, or with partners such as Integrity 360. That is your virtual threat analyst, supporting, not replacing, the engineers that you have today. So if we kind of look a little bit further, and this is where a lot of the conversations generally are happening with the cybersecurity space. So SIM, XDR, analyzer technologies, for me, they're kind of like data lakes. This is where organizations, your partners are saying, look, send us your logs, send us your information, send us your telemetry, and then we will kind of analyze, we will process that for you, and the SOAR technology overlays the data lakes. So if things like SIM, Analyzer, and SOAR are the receiving data lakes, SIM, XDR, and Analyzer are the receiving data lakes, the SOAR technology overrides the top of that, and that is the automation and response channel. And again, this is Gartner terminology. They refer to it as CARA, which is Central Analytics and Response Automation. And in environments where customers and partners say, well, I really like the concept of just offloading that responsibility to you. I like the EDP stack, but it looks like there's work involved there. It looks like there's things to be done. I like the concept of the data lake because it's just sending you the information. But who's going to actually then process that information? Who's actually then going to take the relevant responses? So at Fortinet, we offer, again, the services via FortiGuard. But us as a vendor, we just can't scale. If you guys are customers, no one will know your organization better than the partner that you work with. And Integrity 360 are a perfect example of that. Ourselves as Fortinet, we pass our threat intel onto partners such as Integrity 360. So if you're a customer, you don't necessarily have to work directly with Fortinet if you want to offload the responsibility of the data lake and the response automation to us. And we actually don't recommend it. In those type of environments, if all the customers that were Fortinet customers relied on us to provide kind of MDR and incident response, we just wouldn't be able to scale. And we certainly wouldn't know yourself as a digital organization or as a digital asset, as well as your partner like Integrity 360 would. And just to kind of wrap up on, so deception technology, again, when it comes to SecOps, is proving to be very effective. So we have something called FortiDeceptor that can then spin up fake virtual machines, client operating systems, server operating systems, CCTV cameras, fake FortiGates. And what we can actually do, which sounds a bit crazy, is in FortiDeceptor, we can actually host, so FortiGuard. So when there's an emerging threat or a brand new vulnerability, there's that, a mass of information and fake news in regards to what's actually real in regards to the vulnerability. So what FortiGuard can actually do is say, look, we found a clean version of the vulnerability. We can actually then update your deception platform so that you can intentionally start, start a virtual machine that publishes that vulnerability. So we talked about Log4j. Unfortunately, it's never good to vendor bash, but Ivanti, poor guys, have had a real tough time recently with their vulnerabilities, as well as us. It's no good to throw stones from a glass house. But what FortiDeceptor can actually do is say, well, look, we can then give you a clean version of that vulnerability, which you can spin up in a virtual environment that will intentionally host that vulnerability, so you can see if there's any lateral movement, if there's any insider interest, or if you're being targeted externally as well. And with everything that FortiDeceptor does, we can make API calls in and API calls out. So as soon as someone starts interacting with the fake virtual machines, we can then send out the relevant responses out to the Fortinet devices or non-Fortinet devices if you're going to use the API. And just to kind of wrap up, there are a couple of slides more, but I think this is a good place to finish. If you're interested in this, the kind of building of the SecOps platform, the building of the technology stacks, but you don't have the budget, you don't have the resources, then like to Fortinet, like with Integrity 360, it literally is a case of then, okay, well, look, we don't have to go in as something as heavy with the EDP stack. It can really start at people, logs, processes, and starting from the data lake. So literally pointing your logs in a certain direction will then allow you to tap into this wealth of knowledge. And obviously, us as Fortinet, we run all these technology stacks in our own security operations center and a whole lot more. We work with a lot of government agencies. We do a lot of work with various partners as well. There are a couple of slides, but I mean, this is a good place to finish. I don't want to keep you from your lunch because that's probably the point people start walking off. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'm here for the rest of the day. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you have a good rest of the event.